Good evening. I'd like to call our regular council meeting for Monday, April 26th to order. Hello to those watching the live webcast and to those who may be viewing the meeting after this evening. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith, and joining me in the council chamber is Councillor Garnett, and our 5 councillor colleagues are joining us via Zoom. You can see them on your screen. Good evening, colleagues. Councillor Duncan, Councillor Fallett, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul, and Councillor Wainwright. And good evening to staff who are in attendance in the council chamber and will link via Zoom as well. I'd like to begin with the territorial acknowledgement and respectfully acknowledge that we're holding tonight's meeting in the territory of the Wasanich Nation. And as I reflect back in the 4 nations, the Sawat, Sartlip, the Sycam, and the Pakwitcha nations here on the peninsula, and as I reflect back on Earth Day, Earth Week last week, the Wasanich nations have been stewards of these lands and nearby waters for millennia, and it was interesting to hear initiatives put forth last week in our country or around the world. But locally, I think we need to be mindful of our continued engagement with local First Nations, and that we are together the stewards of these lands and waters for future generations. Now I'd like to move to approval of the agenda as presented, please.
I'll move the agenda be approved.
Second.
Those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to our public participation period, and during the pandemic we continue to accept written submissions that can be read aloud at the request of members of the public, or to connect via Zoom and to speak to council live at our meeting. And we have no written submissions this evening. We do have 2 speakers, and I would first turn to Mr. Denny Jalina, if you can connect, please.
Excuse me, Mayor, I don't think he's actually connected.
Okay.
He was expected, but I don't see him on there.
Okay, I understand we don't have Mr. Jalina present at the moment. We'll turn to our second speaker, Mr. Tristan Featherston. Can you connect, please, and confirm we can hear each other?
Hello. Hello.
Good evening. You have the floor for about 3 minutes to address council. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hello, good evening, council and Mr. Mayor. My name is Alexa Featherston. This is my husband, Tristan Featherston. We'd just like to thank you so much for having us here today and listening to us. We are so excited for the chance to be able to become a part of this community that we have grown to love so much with our small family-owned brewery. We feel a brewery will be a welcomed addition to this ever-growing and evolving town, bringing even more people into the downtown core to enjoy everything Sidney has to offer. With Sidney being one of the few communities left without a brewery, we feel Sidney would benefit immensely from it. Supporting local is also something we are very passionate about in our personal life, and we look forward to doing the same with our business. We plan on doing this by supporting other local businesses by carrying their products, hiring local, and using ingredients from local agricultural producers. We hope Sidney will support us in the way we plan to support Sidney. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming before council this evening. During public participation, we don't normally turn to questions, but one question did arise from a colleague today. And so I would like to make an exception and just ask, with regards to brewing taking place on site, a question: will there be odors from that, and are there mitigation or management measures that you would take for that?
Yes, thank you. So we want to be the best neighbors we can be. Our customer base is the people that live near us and can walk in, and the people of Sidney. So we don't want to make anyone upset. The scale of our brewery is not like when you hear about the odors from big breweries. We're quite small, and we have a couple of options that we can use where we don't produce any odors at all. We would like to stay as green as possible. So our first option is to vent through the top of the building. It's a 3-story building, so we hope that it coming out of the top of the building, it won't affect any of our neighbors. But if it becomes a problem, we can add what's called a steam condensation. Sorry, I forgot the name. A steam condensation tower, which takes the steam from our boil kettle, mixes it with cool water, and it condenses and goes down the drain. So that way we're not adding anything to the atmosphere.
Well, thank you for taking the question, and thank you for your answer. And as you know, we do have it on our agenda later this evening to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll next circle back to Mr. Denny Genola if he's, I'm understanding that he's not joining us this evening. And so I will move on, bring public participation to a close, and we have two presentations this evening. The first, I would ask if Steve Duck and Dennis Carlsen could please join and confirm we're connected.
Good evening. So, Mr. Mayor, I have a PowerPoint that I would like to share with Mayor and Council, if that's all right.
Certainly. If I could just introduce for a moment, Mr. Carlsen. We're pleased to have Steve Duck and Dennis Carlsen from the Sidney Community Association Board of Directors to present to Council tonight on the town's official community plan review project. Gentlemen, you do have the floor for 10 minutes, and please proceed.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council, staff, and attending public. Tonight, the Sidney Community Association wishes to present its work relative to the official community plan review being conducted by the town. As president of the Sidney Community Association, I'm here representing the membership, working group participants, and the general public who have been active in our process. Over the past 2+ years, the Sidney Community Association has engaged members and residents in identifying and focusing on 3 critical areas: transportation, environment, and development. In addition to the Community Association membership input, each was studied by specific work groups, which conducted information collection, research, focus groups, and compiled reports on the area. A report was compiled by each issue group and then circulated to the membership and interested residents for feedback. Many of you would have seen these draft reports. Tonight, in conjunction with our presentation, we have provided these reports to the town as part of the council package. For the public, these reports are available through our website, sydneycommunityassociation.ca. Given that the environmental issues are addressed through the Saanich Peninsula Environmental Coalition report and the attention of Sidney and North Saanich municipal staff seeking active transportation input and developing reports in 2021 and 2022, the Sidney Community Association feels our reports will be complementary to further work on these issues. The following have been identified in the Transportation and Environment reports as the salient points. Transportation. The Sidney Community Association feel that the town of Sidney needs to be do far more about increasing mode share of cycling, walking, and public transportation by upgrading design guidelines for streets to include protected cycling infrastructure, but also that clear visual cues are given to drivers that reflect the actual speed limits on the street. By upgrading development guidelines for sidewalks to ensure that they are conducive to an efficient and pleasant walking road.
And that's a big deal for us. You heard the previous speaker before your presentation talked about the west side, the Gallaran neighborhood, looking at the local area plan and mixed-use village. And now we're looking at a major warehouse space. Doesn't matter how beautiful it is, it's a major change to what is there. And I think we as a council, we as a town, we as a municipality, as beneficial as a tax base is, and exciting to hear about 120 jobs per shift. You've heard 2 other councillors talk about the availability of workforce. This is something that is going to be with us and shape who we are in the future. So we have to look at this very, very carefully. We've had councillors talk about the traffic study and all of that, and I'll leave that to them because I do have a concern about the traffic. For me, it is the personality of who we are as a community and what this is going to do for us. And is it a price that we're willing to pay? The benefits, are the benefits something that our community wants? There is no free ride. Everything comes at a price. And you're in business and you want to make sure that your business stay there. And this is our town. I'm one of 7 people who's making a decision. And it's not even really our decision. We're just here giving courtesy comments. The decision lies with the airport. So I'm not asking you any questions. I think you've explained your position well, and you've responded to other councillors' questions. I just want you to hear, and for your tenant, and for the VAA to hear that this is a big deal for our community. This is, however this goes, this is an important step in who we are today and who we will be 5 years and 20 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor Rintoul.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the question I'd like to ask you is about, well, what are you going to do about community engagement? And the reason I'm asking that, we're not the decision makers. You're making a presentation to us, but basically all we do is make some recommendations to VAA, and we've got a good relation. They'll probably follow them, but I'm certain that our community is going to have quite a bit of interest in this. Tonight is the first time people are hearing about it, unless they saw some posts on social media about the agenda. But this is a really huge proposal relative to other developments in Sidney, other developments of that approach this kind of scale have had significant opportunities for the public to find out about them so they can understand what's being proposed. I'll say that, staff does a wonderful job on their reports, but they're directed towards council, and they're really not the most user-friendly thing for the public at large. The plans are the plans. Those are not easy for the average person to follow and actually appreciate what the thing is. And so what people are going to be getting is, I'm sure they're going to be seeing a YouTube clip of tonight's meeting as the main presentation on what you're doing. You've made some comments about manufacturing being like old school and not the vision of the future. And I'm sure that our manufacturing community and the people that work there are not going to pick up all that well on that kind of comment that you made tonight. I think you really should be doing something to reach out to the community and let people know what you're doing, and also informing them of how they can provide input. You've indicated that you'd like to hear from the Galaran neighborhoods. Like, how do they do that? And in terms of our side of it, we've got a deadline of 2 weeks to give our comments. A significant portion of the community probably will not have even heard of this by the time we have to make our comments. So what do you plan to do?
So Councillor Wainwright, if I may, I appreciate those comments. If you will, I would just ask respectfully that there is a process in place that I'm following, right? It is, and if there's frustration with that process, I don't think it's for me to own. The best way I can be transparent is to be in front of you today, answering the questions, your questions, and hearing your concerns as best that I can. Unfortunately, while I hear your concerns and I understand them, I'm not in a position to engage with the community the way I would like to, other than through the process that's established, which is me in front of council here tonight. And going forward, we will have more engagement. So I would, if I may, Councillor, I would rather hear from you and other councillors given this process is what it is, and it doesn't set us up for the best relationship out of the gate. I understand that. What can I do? How can I be, once this process is complete, and if we're able to proceed, how do you recommend I engage with the community? How do you recommend we engage with the community to hear their concerns and try and win back the trust that we're going to, erode because of the process?
I appreciate your response, and I'm really not trying to pick on you, but I am trying to make my comments forceful so that if your tenant watches this video, that they'll hear them. You mentioned that you're constrained by the process, and you did mention some opportunities for public input after this phase completes. And really, that was my question. Are there going to be some opportunities, and could you tell the community when those will happen? Because people who are thinking about getting their comments into Sidney Town Council within the next 2 weeks are probably feeling a bit stressed. So if there are some other opportunities and you're open to that kind of conversation, this would be a great time to say that.
Thank you for saying that. We are absolutely open to feedback from the community, right? Understanding what it is we're trying to achieve within that context. If there are things we can do, I as a developer am absolutely open to that feedback. And after this meeting tonight, I will engage with council, with the mayor, likely as the first source to sort of answer that question. How do we proceed after this, so that we can at least have some form of partnership going forward? Because it will be a long partnership. It will go on for a while between York, between ourselves, and between our tenant and the town.
Thank you. I'll just say that if at the end of the process your tenant does move in here, we'd like to make sure that they integrate well with the community and that everybody gets off to a good footing.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul, then I have Councillor Garnett, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, Mr. Woolsey, thank you for stepping up. As you noted, you don't really have to be here. You've done this to provide us with the information, the opportunity to ask questions, and it's appreciated. As my colleagues have noted, it's a significant project for the town, and so we really want to try and ensure concerns around infrastructure are addressed and concerns for residents. And I'll touch briefly on residents with you. I know you noted in answer to a question, trucks arriving at the facility to coincide with the last ferry. C-SPAN operates 24 hours a day. There's no last ferry with C-SPAN. They come in any time of day or night. And so speak to that, if you would, particularly around, what, other than landscaping and rhododendrons that are on the plan, what's there to buffer noise and light pollution from this facility to residents in the neighborhood? Because in addition to traffic complications, residents are going to want to know about that. So if you've got an opportunity to address that right now, it'd be appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll do my best with the information that I even have, which is that the line haul trucking has been designated, like I said in the presentation, to the west side of the site, which is opposite of a large structure to the residents, and there will be no van deliveries at night, other than the vans returning, let's say, between 6 and 9 p.m. in the evening. In terms of what the actual structure looks like, when you look at the plans, the line haul trucks come in, they do a turn, and they actually reverse underneath the parkade structure. So in terms of constraining sound and that type of thing, I actually think that'll be very beneficial to whatever the sounds that a truck makes. I guess it will be inside of the structure. So I think that's beneficial as well. In terms of lighting, we have done a light puddle plan. As you can imagine, being next to the airport, that's something that the VAA has been very concerned about, and they're watching quite carefully. They don't want light pollution either on the facility. So being honest, that's been a challenging element to try and keep the building as dark as we can, while still keeping it safe for the occupants. It's something we're still talking to the VAA about, but I think we're getting closer. Is there anything else I can touch on for you there, other than really, without knowing the specifics of these operations, how they plan to use this facility? I can tell you, at other facilities, the general pattern is line haul trucks in the evening, and deliveries out late morning, returning after supper. Okay.
Thank you. And just finally, along the same vein, the Victoria Airport Authority has land use guidelines. Their document specifically talks about development adjacent to residential neighborhoods, and it notes that building design, roof lines, and exterior finish should be sympathetic with residentially zoned land. And so I want to ensure that that lens is taken on this project. We'll make comments to the Airport Authority, but again, it's their decision on whether or not this project proceeds. And you as the developer have an opportunity to showcase this new technology and how it's sympathetic to the residents in the immediate neighborhood. And I think it's important. I think that infrastructure needs to be addressed. The issue of noise and lighting pollution, need to be addressed comprehensively in the development. I think you've got an opportunity to go back and look at this through that lens, and I'd encourage you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to sort of piggyback on Councillor Wainwright's comments, and you asked, how would you engage residents? And I'm not specifically speaking to all of Sidney residents. And the question I have for you is, the plans that we've been given for what you propose to build there, I'm assuming those have been in place for a little bit of time now. They're not like just recent, right? So I want to speak specifically to the residents of the Galaran neighborhood, because they are the ones that will be most dramatically impacted by this proposal and this development. So we had we had another project come before us, and the developer actually reached out to the neighborhood before anything came to council, without even our knowledge. And what I would have hoped would have occurred with the VAA and yourself was a combined letter of some sort. And we're only talking about 100. There's about 105 houses in that area. And you don't even have to mention the tenant. You just have to mention what we're looking at now and what proposed use is going to go there, the size, all that stuff, just so they have some time to digest it. And then if you gave them an email or somewhere where they could respond to you, they would. I guarantee they would. And for me, I think that's the approach I would have liked to have seen you taken, and I hope you take that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, and I'll turn to Councillor Keefe.
Thank you. Once again, so I guess for me, just some parting comments and tips of advice to your client. I'm sure you and they are very knowledgeable about change management practices and the importance of engagement, including people, respecting people. I think some of the things that we've heard tonight, when I think about our residents, especially the Galaran residents and other members of the community, what will be their takeaways from tonight? And honestly, what I think their takeaways will be is that there's a big company coming in here. They're going to build a huge facility. They don't seem to want to compromise in terms of the height, in terms of the mass, and they're denying that there will be any impact on traffic in the area. They don't seem to be too interested in hearing what the residents have to say. And they'll be frustrated when they come to us as counselors. I've had some comments already, people having seen the agenda and asking, what is council's role in this? And I said, well, there's really not a lot we can do except provide comments. It's a federal property. The airport authority can do what they want. And so the question asked to me was, well, should we be contacting our member of parliament then? And I said, well, I don't know, perhaps that's an option But I guess what I would communicate to your client is that if they don't go through the steps to engage, inform, and show some respect for our local community, and council's hands are tied, is they'll be looking for other ways to have their grievances heard. And if that means going to their member of parliament, going to the federal minister of transportation. So I guess I would, advise your client to do what they can to show some respect for the community and, consider that moving forward. That's all for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no further speakers, I want to thank you, Mr. Woolsey, for coming before council tonight. It was an option, and we appreciate you took the initiative to come forward and take the time to answer all of the questions that the council brought forward tonight. And we will be looking to the staff report next on our agenda after one or two items, and having a discussion with staff as well. So, thank you again, sir.
Likewise, thank you for all your feedback. And again, I understand this isn't the rollout that you would like, but I hope you can understand the process we're working through is the process, and this is our first effort at engaging the community within that process. So I do hear you, and I will endeavor to do better with community engagement going forward. But I also hope that you can see there are positives to this project. Not just dollars invested, but jobs created, and I think a long-term benefit. And I'm sorry to I know I'm not supposed to be talking too much here, but just a comment, even to Councillor Wainwright's comment. I'm from Edmonton. I'm so familiar with manufacturing jobs and the pride that goes along with that. I know that better than anybody. I also know how quickly the tide turns and how swiftly things can go differently, where keeping up with what's happening in the world becomes important for communities. So hopefully you can also see that project in this light, that in the long term there will be benefits to Sidney and the area. Thanks for your time.
Woolsey. Good evening. We'll next turn to the next item on our agenda, which is under bylaws, and it is item 5A, bylaw number 2214, which is the 2021 tax rate. We have a report from staff. Council, this really concludes our process that started a few months ago for the 2021 budget, and we can proceed this evening through 4 motions as council chooses.
I'll move that bylaw 2214 be given first reading.
Second.
All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
I'll move second reading.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
Move third reading.
Second.
Those in favor? None opposed, motion carries.
And move adoption.
Second.
Those in favor? Sorry, those in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you. We'll next move to adoption of minutes for a regular council meeting of April 12th.
I'll move the minutes be adopted.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? None opposed, motion carries. I'll next turn to my mayor's report, and I'll be brief this evening. Really, I've incorporated or included, as I do on a monthly basis, the CRD board highlights, and this is from our meeting of April 14th. There's just one item I want to draw attention to, I guess has some connection with some of the discussion we've had this evening, and that was the adoption of the Regional Growth Strategy Amendment Bylaw by the CRD board. And I think I just read the synopsis because I can't paraphrase it any better than it's written. And that is, the Regional Growth Strategy is a vision for the future of the Capital Region, guiding decisions on regional issues such as transportation, population growth, and settlement patterns. Local governments and the CRD developed the 2018 Regional Growth Strategy in partnership. and it is being amended to update population, housing, and employment projections. All affected local governments must accept the RGS before the CRD board can adopt it as a bylaw, and all municipalities, including ourselves, have resolved to accept the amended RGS, and the board adopted the bylaw. With that, I'll move on to committee reports, and I'll first turn to Councillor Wainwright, our liaison to the Economic Advisory Committee and their meeting of April 8th.
I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Next, I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul, one of our 3 council representatives on the Beacon Wharf Select Committee and the meeting of April 7th.
I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Discussion? Those in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. Thank you. Next, we'll move to staff reports, and we're now back to the VAA Development Referral at 9899 McDonald Park Road. We have a report from staff dated April 20th, and I'd ask turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
This is a referral from the Victoria Airport Authority for a multi-story distribution warehouse facility, as we've heard earlier in the presentation from Matthew Woolsey there at York Realty. The staff report outlines how the proposal conforms to the VAA land use and development guidelines, and also how it conforms to the Town of Sidney zoning requirements. So it conforms to the Sidney zoning requirements with the exception of building height and front setback. And it conforms with the land use design, the VAA land use and development guidelines, with the exception of building height, site coverage, rear setback, and freestanding signage. The report is fairly thorough in terms of a review of the proposal. I'll just give a quick overview, a reminder of how the town reviews and processes these referrals from the Airport Authority. Excuse me. So the process is laid out in the town's Memorandum of Understanding between the VAA, the Victoria Airport Authority, and the town. That was signed in the year 2000. First, all applicants for development on the airport lands make their development submission to the Airport Authority. The airport staff review the application from an operational, engineering, and environmental perspective. The application is then forwarded on to the Town of Sidney for review within 40 days of receiving the referral. They have a similar process, just a side note here, a similar process with the District of North Saanich. So on airport lands that are also within the District of North Saanich, the same process is followed. So when the town receives the referral, we're to identify any potential impacts on municipal infrastructure, provide comments on the compatibility of the proposed development on the surrounding community, and also provide any other comments and suggestions as appropriate. So the applicant will then address airport and community concerns or suggestions and make amendments to the plan if necessary. And then the Airport Authority reviews the revised plans and prepares a sublease agreement for the applicant when the VAA requirements have been met. So the VAA is the one that gives the authorization to apply for a building permit, which is reviewed and approved ultimately by the Airport Authority. The Airport Authority would also be doing the inspections for the building permit and giving final occupancy. The town is the issuing authority for business licenses on airport lands. If you have any questions about the report, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. I'll turn to colleagues if they have any questions for Ms. Verhagen. I'll start with Councillor Rintoul, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Ms. Verhagen, for the overview on the report. Partially addressed in your report, certainly, but could you just chat a little bit about the MOU that exists? So we have an agreement with the Victoria Airport Authority dated March 2000. And as an example, that document speaks to things like building heights that abut Galaran Road being generally limited to 9 meters. And then we have a February 2020 version of the Victoria Airport Authority Land Use Guidelines. On page 36, it references the maximum height identified as 15 meters. in that same area. This particular project is stated to be over 22 meters in height. At what point in the development or the changes in the guidelines that the airport uses for development how was the town consulted in terms of these changes, and did we have an opportunity to weigh in on VAA land development guidelines?
So in the past, we have been consulted when they want to make changes to their land use guidelines. The town has records of proposed amendments sent over in 2017. Previous to that, the original version is the 2000 version of the document. Our records include a 2007 version of the land use guidelines that contain the same height guidelines as in 2000. In April 2017, the Airport Authority proposed a number of amendments to the land use guidelines, and that version of the document shows the revised height regulations or guidelines that you mentioned. That change to the height guidelines was not included in the list of proposed amendments provided by the VAA, which they provided a summary of the proposed amendments as well as the proposed revised document. That could mean that it had been made in an earlier version, but we aren't aware of any records on that. So council did review those proposed changes in 2017 at the May 23rd council meeting of that year and replied with a statement of no concerns. So after that point, the version that we use is the version in 2017. There were additional changes made in 2020. Just a few small changes to the plans.
Thank you. Thank you for identifying the town's opportunities to comment on the airport's land development guidelines. Two other items, if I may, and I will acknowledge I'm somewhat uncomfortable with the recommendation this evening. As my colleagues have noted in the discussion with Mr. Woolsey, it would be, I think, incumbent on us to have an opportunity to receive some feedback from residents on this proposal, and so I would prefer to see us yield to the motion that's been suggested this evening, and like to put something forward once we've had discussion with staff that differs slightly to the recommendation this evening. Another question, again, in relation to the traffic study, and I did speak to Mr. Wilthy about this. I think staff have commented on this, but perhaps you've heard anything from, asking if you've heard anything from Watt that might clarify this further. There seems to be a disconnect with the report, the access review report dated March 31st, in comparison to the report council received 2 weeks ago, where that Galaran access to Beacon was identified as essentially an immediate priority, sort of a 0 to 3 years needs to be addressed. The access report seems to be largely silent on that, referring to traffic modeling taking infrastructure to 2040. Could you further comment on that item and clarify for council if we've had anything else from Watt on that?
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, I might turn that one over to Ms. Clary if she has any further comments on that one right now.
Thank you, through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul. So the access report says that this development doesn't trigger that roundabout, even though it is a requirement for the area over in the short while. The access report review that Watt did actually, like from this specific development, actually has lower traffic volumes during peak times compared to the study that was done, the Beacon West traffic study that was done, that was based on just a general industrial development for that property. So that's what the Watt study says, that it doesn't actually trigger it, even though it's still required to keep the area flowing well.
Thank you. I'd just comment that I'm somewhat skeptical on that, in that 2 weeks ago we were told this intersection required urgent attention, and now we're seeing a massive distribution center with 800 parking spaces, and it has seemed to have moved the meter in the opposite direction. At this point, I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. If I may ask a question just connected with one you asked and before going to Councillor O'Keefe. And that is, thank you for the background in terms of when the VAA height was amended. Can you speak to when, so I found it a coincidence, or sorry, I found that it might be a coincidence in that process that both Sidney and the VAA have a 49-foot height limit, and we might have gone about it at different processes. Could staff speak in general to, or sorry, would staff know when our zoning was amended to 49 feet at that location, and what would have been the major consideration when determining that height?
The Mayor, I'm not aware of when the M1 zone for the town of Sidney would have changed from something different to the 15-meter height limit. I'd have to look back in the previous versions of the zoning bylaw to determine that. I think that 15 meters would be based on it's about 4 stories in height, based on a typical warehouse facility that you would see in an industrial area. It's important to remember too that heights close to the airport are going to be governed by, it's called the Obstacle Height Limitation Service. It's a federal aviation rule that governs the height of structures and trees and everything close to flight paths. So the VAA has reviewed the proposed height and determined that this building would fit under that surface and would not extend into it. So they can permit the height.
Thank you. I'll next turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. These questions might be directed more for Ms. Clary, dealing with infrastructure related to sewer and water and sidewalks. And I recall we had some discussion a year or so ago in regards to the Galaran sidewalks. We put that on hold because there was infrastructure improvements that were needed in that area. So I'm wondering, does our current infrastructure for sewer, water, stormwater, does it currently have the capacity to meet the needs of the additional pressure from this building? Is, I guess, the first question.
Sure. Through the Mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. With respect to storm, the storm actually goes into VAA's a VAA storm sewer, which then eventually flows into a Sidney storm further downstream. So that's not a Sidney piece of infrastructure. And for water and sewer, our utility study does say that there is adequate flows in that area, or adequate capacity in that area for this development.
Okay, and then and the plans that we have for Galaran, for those infrastructure upgrades and the sidewalks, I can't remember when those are planned for, but will they be impacted by this development going on at the same time at all?
So there are some town of Sidney storm sewer upgrades in the area planned for 2022. However, they're fairly minor. It's not like a large storm drain going down the entire Galaran. So those could be built at the same time or could be built later on in the year in 2022. And then there's also a water main that we're making upgrades on further north on Galaran, so not immediately adjacent to this development. And then the plan is to repave Galaran and build the sidewalks and the on-street parking in 2023. So to give the utilities a few months to settle before we actually pave the whole road to finality.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. And then just one more question, if I may, Mr. Mayor, in regards to fire department needs. If we have someone available for that, and basically, my question is, given that this building is higher than anything we have in Sidney, it's a huge mass. I presume if it's a distribution facility, it will have all kinds of stuff in it. And so just wondering from our fire department,
if they anticipate a need for any further resources in the future in terms of, bigger, taller equipment or staff or training. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Through to Mayor, the Councillor O'Keefe. This building will be tall. I don't believe it'll be taller than the Pier Hotel. Our existing ladder truck is 75 feet, and our fire underwriter survey, which was conducted in 2014, targets the replacement of our 75-foot ladder truck with a 100-foot truck in either 2022 or 2023. So I don't anticipate that'll be an issue, and the risk is much different as obviously the Pier Hotel houses people, where this will obviously is a distribution facility. So the risk to life is not as great as individuals there won't be sleeping, which is our primary concern. Or at least hope not. They'll be up and able to evacuate quickly. It will be obviously a new building and be fully sprinklered, enunciated. Obviously, the type of facility with its fire load and massing is the kind of thing that keeps someone like myself up at night, but not in the context in comparison with the massive infill we've had in built form in the downtown core of late. That's equally or much more concerning. That'll require likely additional staffing at night and sooner rather than later. So that is not, that building is big, but it's not my primary concern.
Right. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Mr. Hagan.
Through the mayor to all of council, just to come back to the question on when the Sidney's M1 zone allowed a 15-meter height in that area. We've looked back and found that was permitted in zoning bylaw 750 at a height of 15.3 meters, and that was adopted in 1982. So it has been quite some time.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Any further questions from council? Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Councillor Rintoul, you indicated.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to put forward a motion, and happy to speak to it. I'd like to move receipt of the report for information and instruct staff to bring back the report in order to address concerns identified by council for further discussion at the May 10th council meeting.
Second.
Discussion? I'll let Councillor Rintoul motivate and then go to Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chiefly, I see this as an opportunity to give pause to the process to allow staff and council to consider the significant discussion that we've had this evening on this proposed development. I think it may give staff the opportunity to readdress some of the items in the report that were queried this evening. But more importantly, it gives pause to allow residents and members of the community an opportunity to provide comment on the proposal, which could be included in the council package at our next meeting. And so I'd certainly like to hear some of that insight, and perhaps we'll see from that feedback likely some concerns that we have not addressed or foreseen this evening, and be able to incorporate that into our recommendations to the Airport Authority. I further understand our deadline to submit feedback to the Airport Authority is May the 11th. Our next meeting being May the 10th gives us an opportunity to again revisit this significant land development proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Before going to Councillor Garnett, I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may, and maybe I missed it, but could we have maybe just a summary of the concerns that Council's requesting staff to address in the next subsequent report and at the next meeting?
From my perspective, they were extensive, and one of which comes immediately to mind is an opportunity to circle back to what and perhaps clarify in the report, concerns that were addressed around the access report versus the traffic study. I also heard queries from Councillor O'Keefe that maybe could be further flushed out around infrastructure that we hadn't addressed fully, water and sewer. And I know Ms. Clary answered that question. I don't recall those being incorporated in the report. So I think there's an opportunity to provide a little more detail based on the discussion. But again, most importantly, the intent here is to provide residents an opportunity to become familiar with the proposal and provide comment.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor. I did have Councillor Garnett before Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarification's sake, so are we not going to be making comments this evening, and you and Councillor Rintoul, you're wanting us to save our comments until the May 10th meeting?
I would, if I could answer that.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rintoul. I think, you know, the motion is to refer to the next meeting for a couple of reasons. One is for staff to consider, but also is for the opportunity for the public to bring comment back to us. So if you had comments, certainly feel free to comment, and in particular, if there were things that you would want to see staff address that they haven't addressed. I think we've spoken to the need for a public engagement.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to wait to provide comment at the next meeting. That's fine.
Okay. No, as you wish. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I support what the motion that Councillor Rintoul is putting forward, because it gives our community a chance to raise some concerns that maybe we haven't thought of, that aren't in the staff report, and you know, then we can consider whether we should make recommendations regarding those or not. And it's been mentioned that the meeting is going to be on the 10th, and our comments have to be in the very next day. So please, if you have significant comments to make, don't make them verbally on the 9th of the 10th, because you're going to catch us by surprise, and we're going to have to think about what to do with your comments in the meeting that night and make our recommendations and get the wording right and all that kind of thing. So please, 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 if you have something significant in the way of a concern, let us know in advance so we at least have a bit of time to think about it. With respect to our CAO's questions about comments or concerns, from my perspective, a key question is the traffic improvement side of it, and Councillor Rintoul already spoke to that. The second major one is the compatibility of the east face of the building and the landscaping, and basically the east treatment of the project and its compatibility with the Gallowland residential area. I have to say I'm not as concerned about the infrastructure, the water sewer types of issues. The road ones and the compatibility ones would be the ones that come top of mind. The last one I'd ask staff to bring to our attention in the report is if we're going to, if it's appropriate for us to modify any of our capital works plans because of timing issues related to this development. So for example, if we've got a water main that needs replacement in the future that's going to be under the footprint of a development, we'll probably be thinking about advancing that. So staff can give us some feel for how much our capital plans might change. And those would be the issues I'd raise. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I'll go back to Councillor Garnett and then Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll just raise one thing because it's different from what you said, and it's just something that I know from the usage in that area that I have. I do have concerns around Access 3 for the employees, in the fact that Access 3 is it's pretty much right across from a BC Transit stop, which in itself isn't horrific based on the fact that it's not that widely used, but it is right across the street from a school bus stop. And I'm not sure if they let out at the same place on the other side of the street, but that's an issue I think that we need to be in contact with maybe the school district about, potentially moving from a safety perspective. If there's going to be a constant flow of traffic and employees going in there and small, because they're elementary school age children, because as of now there's no sidewalk and they're sort of standing by the road or on the road. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I support the motion. As we discussed, it's a huge project for our community. It's not, within our purview to have a formal public hearing or anything like that. So if at least community members can learn about this through watching our meeting and maybe seeing highlights in the local press, they can at least provide some comments. So I think it's a good idea to at least provide that bit of time. Also, I think perhaps it might give the proponent of the project an opportunity to reflect on what they've heard tonight and go back to their client, and maybe upon having thinking about it a little bit more, they might be inclined to come back on the 10th of May to say that they are able to perhaps compromise in some of these areas. The traffic is a big thing that I'm having difficulty with as well, and the interface with the Galaran neighborhood. So if there's things that they can think about to contribute to mitigating those, it gives them that time to ponder that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no other speakers, I'd like to make some comments and really start at 30,000 feet, if you will. In my inaugural address, and I know it continues to be of concern and comes up again in our discussions of the OCP, is our sense of place is remarkably important to us in our community. And we enjoy a very high quality of life, and that has arisen out of a number of opportunities. And I know a lot of residents, a lot of visitors feel closely associated with the downtown business community that has nearly 400 businesses, a lot of locally owned and operated businesses, and that's where they have engagement. We have the waterfront where they can have engagement, and that's important to the quality of life. But being at 30,000 feet on the north end of the peninsula, we are in a transportation hub, and this transportation hub has evolved with BC Ferries rising to serving 7.5 million people at a Schwartz Bay terminal in 2019, the Victoria Airport Authority exceeding 2 million passengers in 2019. The Sidney Anacortes Ferry Run will celebrate its 100th anniversary next year, if it indeed is able to come back. And we have thousands of marina berths on the north end of the peninsula that serve people locally and beyond, well beyond our locally. And one of the aspects is that the Victoria Airport was established at the time as a training base prior to the outbreak of the Second World War, at the time of the outbreak of the Second World War. And when the Victoria Airport Authority was established in the 1990s, these are federal lands, and given the aviation activities, that is the direct airport activities with flights, there are buffer lands around the airport because building houses right up beside a runway isn't feasible. And so the current airport lands are mostly in North Saanich, but we have a reasonably significant portion, given their activity, in Sidney. And in particular, we have Beacon Avenue, the Pat Bay Beacon Avenue interchange, and the corridor going along Beacon Avenue West, curving over to McDonald Park Road. And really the Sidney North Saanich border is the yellow line down in the middle of McDonald Park Road until it goes out again at McDonald Park Road and the Pat Bay Highway again. And Victoria Airport lands end at Henry on the Sidney side and end at Mills Road on the North Saanich side. But what has happened over the decades is that the Victoria Airport Authority, apart from winning awards and operating the airport, the international airport, it has attracted companies that do business nationally and internationally on the global stage. Viking Air came to Sidney in the 2000s and hired in excess of 300 people at one time. Sobeys, I was looking up, remember they established back around the 2012 period. They lease 19 acres. They invested $32 million for their 125,000 square foot distribution center. Vancouver Island Helicopters, now VIH Aviation Group. SLEG Building Supplies. We can go on in terms of the significant businesses, some local such as SLEGs and some international like Viking Air. And really it's evolved, and it's evolved reasonably over the decades to provide stimulus to the economy, to provide employment, and suitably so given the lands immediately adjacent to the airport activities. And I'm going to come to more specifically about this development, but I think we should keep in mind that our sense of place does include the economic activity, the important economic activity that does occur in Sidney North Saanich Industrial Park along that corridor and elsewhere on the VAA lands, because it does provide remarkable employment opportunities and ongoing economic stimulus, as well as tax base to the community, and that helps provide the amenities throughout our community that residents and others enjoy. I want to thank staff for their detailed report, which required a substantial interdepartmental staff review. It's important to note, as staff did at the beginning of the report and in their introduction tonight, that the VAA approves developments on these federal airport and industrial lands. Town of Sidney staff and council provide no approvals regarding the development permit, any variances, or the building permit, and colleagues have touched on that a number of times this evening. We are fortunate to have an MOU agreement between the Victoria Airport Authority and the town, whereby there is a 40-day referral period for staff to conduct a technical review of the plans and community impacts. There is not a requirement for an MOU between the local government and an airport authority. Staff have recommended specific comments back to staff are recommending specific comments back to the VAA, and council's role is to deliberate on those comments as we have done and approve them, which we'll do at our next meeting. We are fortunate that the town of Sidney took the initiative earlier in this council term to determining the future transportation infrastructure needs from the Pat Bay Beacon intersection along Beacon Avenue West, McDonald Park Road to the other intersection. Mr. Humble and I approached the VAA and North Saanich to partner on the $60,000 study of this corridor so that we could seek to work together to address the challenges that exist today and the ones in the future as the remaining vacant airport lands in this corridor develop. Council only received that detailed report with a presentation at our last council meeting, and in itself it contains a lot of information to digest. Our council has had a previous referral from the VAA during our council term, the Titan Boats development, and there have been referrals to previous councils. During those previous referrals, council gave consideration to the staff's report and recommended comments and approved those comments in a single evening. What we've heard tonight is, given the location of this particular development and given the scale of the development, that the MOU created some 20 years ago may not have foreseen a development such as this and its location and the importance of community engagement in the process. And I want to thank several colleagues for raising the importance of community engagement direct to York Development tonight, and in our comments that we hope will find their way to the prospective tenant that will operate this facility. And so I will leave it with staff just as a thought that one of the recommendations could be considered in the report to the VAA is that while there doesn't seem to be an opportunity for direct engagement with the developer during the next 2 weeks, councillors did engage with regards to opportunities once it does go back to the VAA, that it perhaps be considered as a recommendation be considered that they engage with the community, the local community of the Gallery neighborhood, but also the community at large, in particular on traffic infrastructure. So I appreciate that council has waded through a lot of information, beginning with the Watt full corridor traffic study 2 weeks ago, and through the detailed VA plans that were forwarded in the detailed staff report. And thank you for your fulsome discussion and the questions that you presented to York Realty and staff. And with that, I do see a question from Councillor O'Keefe. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just thinking about, in terms of providing comments back, whether this is something, because it's on the border of our North Saanich neighbors, is this something that we would forward to them for comments? I know it's not on their land, but certainly perhaps the traffic might impact them. Is this something that we would do as a normal course?
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, for past VAA referrals, all of ours are close to the border of North Saanich, given where the VAA lands in the town of Sidney are. And referring it to North Saanich would be new for this one. We have not done that in the past with the Titan Boats referral, which is directly adjacent to the boundary, or for the Sea Star Chemicals referral at the corner of Henry Ave West and McDonald Park Road. Neither of those were referred to the district of North Saanich.
Yeah, understood. I guess this one being such a larger and more significant, whether we might do that. I don't know. I just leave that there for consideration, I presume. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, through to Councillor O'Keefe. I would also wonder whether or not it would be appropriate, I guess, for the town to do that. I think it would be something that the VAA would be the ones to make that referral, not the town of Sidney. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And Ms. Verhagen.
Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, one more comment on that is, given that the district of North Saanich was one of the parties involved in the Beacon West traffic study, and that traffic study contained information about this development and the development potential of the site, I'm sure they're already aware of portions of this and may have seen it on the town's council agenda as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you again, Council, and thank you, staff. We'll turn to the next item on our agenda, which is item 13B, which is an LCRB referral regarding Beacon Brewing Liquor Lounge at 9837 3rd Street. This is the new development called Oceana on the former fire hall lands. And we have a report from staff, and I'll turn to Mr. Humble for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If Mr. Newcomb is available, maybe he can provide the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a referral from the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch for Beacon Brewing, as the mayor said, in the former fire hall property building. It's, I guess, what would be termed a nano brewery, a very small microbrewery. And the type of liquor license that is being applied for through the LCRB is a lounge endorsement. So that's not a liquor primary license like a typical pub or a bar might have. And it's not a food primary license like, say, a restaurant with liquor endorsement has. It's a smaller, typically made for manufacturers like a brew pub or a distillery, very similar to what Victoria Distillers has as well. It's a smaller in scale type of license arrangement. So this, the use here is not termed a lounge in our zoning bylaw. It's termed a brew pub. And the use in our zoning bylaw in this particular area is conditional permitted use. The conditions being specific to mitigating noise impacts on the property. So there's some specific regulations around that. The hours, as you can see, are in the staff report are very similar to other liquor primary pub type licenses in Sidney. later hours on Friday and Saturday nights. And the business would have beer brewed on site, as the applicant has stated. And the license, I believe, would also allow for some limited off sales as well. So again, beer that's brewed on site, and I believe it allows for sort of growlers or six-pack type of off sales on a relatively small basis. And there is a liquor and cannabis regulation branch requirement here. Council needs to comment on the referral, and that comment involves the gathering of views of the community. So very similar to what we've done in past weeks with cannabis referrals as well. And so that would involve, as the recommendation states, 2 advertisements in the local newspaper, as well as a mail out to surrounding businesses and residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb, and I'll first turn to colleagues if they have any questions. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question, if I may, Mr. Newcomb. With regards to the mailing out within 100 meters, do we have allowances to extend that? And the reason I bring that up is that looking at the circumference of the 100 meters, the vast majority of residences at this point are unoccupied given the construction that's going on. So I'm thinking in terms of being able to reach the most amount of people possible to hear feedback.
Through the mayor to rest of council, I guess. The policy liquor and cannabis license.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So my questions are to do with the hours of operation and the noise which you referred to. I note that, staff says that there is precedent in the town for establishments like the Dickens and the liquor stores being open till 11 o'clock, but this is the only one that has residential units above. And so I'm thinking about noise for those future residents, especially as Councillor Garnett has mentioned they haven't moved in yet. So I'm just wondering, in terms of our conditional uses that you mentioned earlier about noise, how is that treated? So if we were to approve this for them to stay open till 11 o'clock on Friday and Saturdays, and then once the building gets occupied by residents and there's complaints about noise, do we have the flexibility to ask them to scale back their operation till 10 o'clock, or what are our options in a case like that?
Thanks for the question. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. As far as I'm aware, the LCRB does not typically amend licenses after the fact unless there's a significant issue. So I think the potential to have the license changed once issued, I believe, is fairly small. I know it has happened, but it's been in some very specific and I think extreme instances. Given the size of this location, first of all, I don't think staff anticipate any significant amount of noise. The floor plan allows for 45 people in there. Just to note that these numbers for hours and the occupant load are all, I guess, post-COVID numbers. So obviously wouldn't be able to accommodate that right now at all. But when things get back to normal, those would be the numbers. But I would be surprised to find that many people in there at any given time. However, I mean, if someone's leaving and, sort of standing in the street and making noise, and it can be directly attributed to this business, and maybe it happens on a consistent basis, the town could potentially fine the business for that. I believe the fine is something like $200 per occurrence. And so there's the noise bylaw that would allow for that fine. And then there's also the conditions of use for the zoning, which would allow for a different fine as well. I think that one's about $260, but that one's specific to music playing. So live music outside or music inside that's loud enough that can be audible from, say, upstairs in the residences. I would say, though, that I think, the town needs to keep in mind that this is a commercial downtown. I believe the wording in the official community plan currently is something like the residential uses are a secondary but significant component of the downtown. So I think the idea here is that the commercial uses take a fairly primary role in being approved, and not saying that the residential uses don't count for anything, but I think people move into the downtown expecting a certain level of noise, and staff feel that this is a reasonable level. So,
okay. Yeah, my concern was not necessarily the number of people and people on the street, but more the live music aspect that they referenced in their submission. And but it sounds like, based on what you said, if it became an issue, it does sound like there's some avenues for us to address those.
Yeah, I think as far as music goes, there's some fairly strong regulations in place between the zoning and the noise bylaws. Okay. With people in the street, I think that's a lot more difficult to attribute to any one business. And, there's going to be, say, a theater across the street in the future that will have 100 people come out of it at 11:30 at night as well. So, that's just a feature of life in a commercial downtown with mixed-use buildings.
Yeah, good. Understood. Thank you for that.
Other questions? Seeing none, I'm actually going to follow up on the noise for just a moment. So, sorry, I'm not quite appreciating how the noise is regulated. So, if there was live music indoors, at what point does it become a consideration? Are we able to comment on that in our comments to the LCRB? Rather than waiting for live music to happen and then residents in upper stories complaining and dealing with it then. I'm not suggesting that's going to happen. I'm just saying, how is it regulated?
So that's something that would be sort of, I think, outside the scope of the liquor license. The liquor license would deal with specifically liquor related things. So in terms of noise that's inside the unit but's audible from outside, and disturbs the peace and quiet enjoyment of, say, residents upstairs, the business would then be contravening the noise bylaw, which has a specific clause that states essentially that noise that disturbs the quiet, peace, and enjoyment of nearby residents is not permitted. So in that case, there could be a fine under the noise bylaw. With the zoning, one of the clauses is that any amplified music inside the premises is permitted, but it must not be audible from outside again, and the unit must have the proper sound insulation. So if that's not the case and noise is audible from outside, they're breaking the conditions of use, and again, you're looking at a fine of a certain amount per occurrence.
So thank you for that clarification, and which has come before council in the cut cartels. So it is within the zoning bylaw about amplified noise not being heard outside. And the second I had was a question addressed, a question during public participation to the proponent with regards to odor and odor management. And again, the regulation of that, is that spoken to in the zoning at all?
No, it's not. The building, as the proponent stated, the building was built with chases from the first story commercial units out through the roof. So the potential for, food preparation exhaust, potentially exhaust from stills or something like that is there as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I think next councillor was Councillor Fallett, and then Councillor Keefe wanted to speak a second time.
Thank you very much. Also to you, Mr. Newcomb, in the construction of the building, I would assume that there is some mitigation factor between commercial and residential for noise impact. Obviously, the commercial businesses, there's a whole slew of potential, but is there anything that you're aware of in the construction that already takes into consideration a variety of tenants for the commercial to cut noise transference?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Fallett. First of all, between the commercial units on the first floor and the residential units above, there's a 10-inch thick concrete slab, suspended slab. that alone is going to be a significant noise inhibitor. What they're doing across the street at the theater is the concrete slab plus some noise mitigation measures on the underside of the slab. So anything that gets through the insulation hanging off the concrete slab is going to hit the slab and probably go nowhere. So a place like the theater with Dolby sound and things like that is going to have a much larger noise impact than say a business like this. And in speaking with the architect across the street, they're fairly confident that no noise will be audible through that slab. So I don't think that's a huge concern in this case. There might be a concern with businesses next door, but if it's say a business that's not open, say past 5 o'clock, probably not as big of an issue. Another way you can mitigate that is to have a double wall with, again, sound insulation in that double wall to sort of dampen things even more. So there are options in from a construction perspective.
Thank you for that, Mr. Newcomb. And just further to what both yourself and Councillor O'Keefe had talked about, there is going to be a theater across the street. There is going to be a certain level of activity. Anyhow, my sense is with the size of this brewery and the size of their space that they're going to have number of customers post-COVID, they aren't looking to create a loud, noisy nightclub atmosphere. My sense, that isn't what my sense is here in this whole thing. So I think it's good that we've talked about it and we've addressed and questioned the noise potential. The proponents are listening in, so they're certainly aware of our concerns, but I personally don't see that this is going to be a problem for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Councillor O'Keefe.
Just getting back to the odor again. So you mentioned, and they talked about in their presentation, their intention to use some sort of process that doesn't create odor, or it isn't very much. If it did happen to be an issue, is that something that would be covered off by our nuisance bylaw?
Odor's a tough one because it's subjective to a certain degree. I grabbed a curry from the restaurant on Beacon Avenue tonight, and I could smell that coming from half a block away.
Yeah.
Not something that I find objectionable, and again, I don't think I find the smell of brewing beer objectionable either, but some people might. So it's a challenge to deal with that. I think the first line of defense there would be to work with the applicant and see what kind of technical mitigation measures could be put in place. But the truth is, I think, once you've got a use like this in the building, that may only go so far. But again, I think the scale here is not overly large. I mean, it's probably slightly larger than someone's elaborate home brewery. So yeah, I mean, with the chase, between the chase and the steam condensing tower option, it is a permitted use. So the town specifically allowed for brew pubs. So I think this has to be expected.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that.
Okay. Thank you for questions, Council. We do have staff recommendations.
I'll move that staff be directed to gather the views of residents regarding the proposed liquor license lounge area endorsement application at 9837 3rd Street, Beacon Brewing Limited, and report back to council with the results. 2, that the methods used to gather residents' views include the following: that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council for consideration. A, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 100 meters, 328 feet of 9837 3rd Street be notified by mail. B, that advertisements be placed in 2 consecutive issues of Peninsula News Review. And 3, that council provide a special public participation opportunity at the council meeting where the public may speak to the proposal.
Second.
Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you, Council. We'll next turn to item 13C, which is the Tulista Park sidewalk improvements. We have a report from staff, and I'll turn to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you. So this is a report on the Tulista Park sidewalk improvements. This project is actually a carryover from 2020 to the 2021 budget year. So staff are eager to see it through this year. But through detailed design, we determined that some trees would, for our preferred option, some trees would require removal. So staff's preferred option is to actually widen the sidewalk in its existing alignment. Reasons that the sidewalk needs improvements are it floods every winter, and it often needs to be closed during the winter just due to poor drainage, and if there's any risk of freezing, then there could be risks of ice forming there. And also that the tree roots, the trees that are currently lining the path are poplar trees, and they have an invasive root system. So they often do heave the existing sidewalk and require lots of maintenance. So the staff's preferred option is option A, outlined in the report, to remove one line of the poplar trees on one side of the path, widen the path out to make it a multi-use path, because it is used very often by users of the skate park, as well as just residents walking through doing the loop of Sidney. So widening it out will allow people to distance, but also just to allow for that multi-use. Right now it is kind of narrow for that. And if we are to remove the 5 poplar trees on the east side of the path, we would replant them with London plane trees, which are a tree with a much wider canopy. So overall, we would be increasing the town's canopy when the trees are, at maturity. They would also provide a lot more shade for the path and park users in the long term, and we could also plant them further away from the path, so the roots wouldn't have as much of an impact on the pathway. So there's a lot of benefits to switching out the trees in the long run anyway, and doing this now and swapping out 5 trees at this time for a more suitable species in the area has a lot of benefits. And then long term, as the poplars on the west side start to age and become hazardous, then we would switch those out for London planes as required as well. So there would be London planes on both sides of the path in the long term. However, with the sensitivity of trees, the staff did look at several other options. There is option B outlined in the report as well, which would still require the removal of 2 of the poplar trees, which we would recommend replacing with London plane trees. However, it does have the path go further out into the park space and keep the existing path in place for as long as possible, just maintaining it to make sure it's safe and accessible for people to use. So the second option does have drawbacks in that we would need to relocate a water main if we wanted to move the bollard lighting that's on the existing path. That would be additional costs, and it still does require 2 trees to be removed to make this path work. And it also takes up more of the park space, which on sunny days, pedestrians do use the space in Tulista Park. So those are our options, but we did want to bring it to council just because of the sensitivity with trees, and we know that the town really values trees. However, we do think the long-term option A is the best option for Tulista Park and park users in the area.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn to colleagues, and I see I'll start with Councillor Garnett, then go to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This may be actually a question for Mr. Robinson, probably. I did do some research on London planes, and it does seem like a more suitable tree for our environment in terms of growth and what it would provide. I guess the question I have is, if we do remove the poplar trees and replace them with the London planes, would we be able to acquire trees that are, say, because we're removing some pretty mature trees, acquire London planes that are a little further along the track in terms of growth, so that they would provide some more immediate benefits to the community?
Through the mayor to council, certainly we would try to get the biggest specimen tree that we could in order to try and get some growth happening. The difficulty is with the larger specimens, the more care they take in the short term for the first 2 or 3 years, we would probably need to make sure that that we're looking after them well. Usually what happens is they get a fairly severe root prune before we get them into the ground. So we'd want to establish that. But certainly the possibility is that we would look for those types of advantages to try and keep the atmosphere the way it is as much as possible. The other thing with the poplar trees is, respectfully, I'd probably suggest we're at probably 75% of life cycle right now, just based on what we're seeing. So, 10 years from now or 15 years from now, if we get some severe weather and we get some major branch detachments off that, we may be considering other options with the remaining trees as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't not thrilled about losing 5 trees. So option A concerns me, and then option B is not great for the reasons staff have identified. And I know, I proposed a third option to staff in regards to the possibility of constructing the path on top of that berm. And I understand that there's some concerns about that. One issue of persons with accessibility issues who can't get up the slope of the berm. Also, having the path closer to the road may put path users like children at higher risk being close to the road. I think both of those things could be mitigated, actually, in the design and the slope of that. However, it seems like the biggest stumbling block to that plan, if I understand it correctly, is that there's a large storm drain that runs the length of the berm, and that's going to require some replacement in the future, so we'd have to dig up that sidewalk. So I understand that. I'm wondering, though, about the possibility of, if we don't construct it on top of the berm, could we do it just slightly to the west of it? So between the road and the berm, might that be an option that we could consider?
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. It's definitely something staff can look at, but then you're getting close to the trees again. So we would have to review how much space there is actually there. I'm not sure if Mr. DeMar has any other comments he wanted to add to that.
Sorry, if I could just clarify through Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor, were you suggesting closer to the road or closer to the trees with regards to the...
closer. So when you're looking at the berm facing north, so the poplars and the current path are on the right-hand side, and then there's quite a wide area between the berm and the road. So I was looking at that area west of the berm. So between the berm and the road, somewhere in between there seemed to be quite a bit of space. And so wondered whether that might be an option we could consider to avoid the drain that's underneath. Also, it's probably maybe at a slightly higher elevation so that it wouldn't have the drainage issues that would have in the current location. So whether that's something that we might consider.
I'll turn to staff. Any staff? I see Mr. DeMare. Good evening.
Good evening, Council. Mayor, there's something we could look at a little closer. Certainly keeping the path closer in towards the park. The idea the staff had is keeping those users within the park space and more accessible to that level playing use of that park. As you move it, I think, closer to the road, it sort of takes away from the ambience of that walk as it is. It's quite a nice walk as it is, walking between those trees, and staff felt we'd like it possible to try to maintain that by replacing the poplar trees with the London planes, and then try to recreate that walk that is currently there.
Yeah.
And then the concerns with the berm and accessibility, you know, someone that may be a little more challenged in mobility, if they're up partially on the berm, concerns with grades getting down to that lower area for users to get into the park, and trying to maintain that as best we can.
Yeah, and just wondering whether we might mitigate some of that with reducing the height of the berm, and also if we did have a new path on that side, we could leave all of the poplar trees where they are, and sort of bring that ambience or park feel to the new path by planting a whole new range of trees along the side of it there. Anyways, I'll propose that now. Curious to see, well, if you have a response to that, and then whatever my colleagues have to say.
Yeah, just one additional comment through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. That is highways right of way, so anything we do out in that portion, we'd have to look at getting approvals through the ministry, as well as there is quite a bit of a hydro and TELUS infrastructure in through that berm, as well as the storm drain system. So it may be a challenge, or we may be restricted in terms of lowering any of the grades of the berm there, knowing what infrastructure is actually in the ground there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Fallon.
Thank you very much. And thank you, staff, for all that feedback. This is, I'm glad to see that the pathway is on our agenda to do. And I really don't want to prolong it unnecessarily. It is a pathway, a new sidewalk, replaced sidewalk, an improved sidewalk that is long overdue. Having said that, our options are realign the pathway into the park space, keep it where it is, but lose some of the trees. And if we go with the option of moving it to the west of the popular toward the berm, that really isn't an option either. And either way, we're looking at significant increased cost with whatever's underneath the berm and bollards and the whole bit. It's sounding like staff has looked at this, and it's down to we're going to have to remove some trees in order to make this project happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to first-time speakers before going to Councillor Garnett. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I note in the staff report it makes reference to deficiencies in one in particular, that the trees along the sidewalk frequently heave the surface. Could staff comment on any maintenance and repair techniques that have been utilized over the course of the years to try and mitigate any risk associated with that surface heaving?
Brian here. I'll attempt to do that one to the mayor, to Councillor Rintoul. It's almost an annual occurrence. All you have to do is walk the path and have a look at the evidence, the amount of grinding that we're doing as the joints separate. There's a few spots where we've actually taken out and replaced panels, and you can see that they've started to move already. So again, it's just the nature of that type of tree and the surface roots that are in the area. Just another couple of comments on the berm from a construction perspective is, if any of you have been in Sidney a long time, you'll recall that used to be an open ditch through that area with quite a lot of influence from tidal activity in through the area there. So the size of the pipe that's going to go in there to be replaced is going to be significant. So the trench cut is going to be quite significant as well. So even an offset of the pathway a little bit, depending on the profile of the trench, I would respectfully suggest there may be a good chance that we would lose it regardless of where we put it within the footprint of the berm itself.
Thank you. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, looking at, understanding staff have been maintaining this pathway for some time, it leaves the matter of the width of the path and some drainage issues likely to be addressed. One of my concerns I have with the second option is that when we had talked about possible locations for pickleball courts, it was suggested that we may look at this location as an option. I'm somewhat reluctant to support option B, the second option, in that without really having completed that option for the town, at least studying that option of future use of that space, I'm somewhat reluctant to see us relocate the path that may or may not fit with potential plans of that nature. And frankly, because of that, I almost wonder if it's not better to complete that process of consultation and consideration prior to addressing this path, knowing that the future of the park may alter somewhat with that in mind, and that quite possibly the best course of action for us now is to pursue, for further information, at least one of the options that Councillor O'Keefe has suggested, perhaps closer up to the road, for further information for council. So I'm uncomfortable, with the first option in light of removing 5 mature trees. And I normally look at this through the lens of risk, and what I'm hearing from staff is that on an ongoing basis, they have been working to mitigate the risk of heaving in that area along that pathway. I'll leave my comments there, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright and then myself before going to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm comfortable with option A. The town does value trees, but poplar trees are not high on the list of trees that the town values. We are talking about, like, that particular sidewalk has been an issue for people for a long time. We've gotten a lot of complaints about drainage issues and why can't we do something about it? And we were planning actually to address it earlier. We're just delayed. This is carried forward now. I would like to see us get it done. I'd like to see it done during a reasonable construction window. And if we are replacing trees, at appropriate timing so that they have a good likelihood of survival. And we're not really, yes, there will be 5 trees that get impacted by this, but we are looking at replacements. It's not like these trees are gone forever. And as staff have mentioned, they are approaching end of life. They're going to get replaced at some point eventually. Getting the benefits of a better path, solving the drainage problems, and dealing with a somewhat earlier replacement of a species of tree that isn't high on our list of concern anyway. I'm fine with that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to echo some of Councillor Wainwright's comments. Coming into tonight's meeting, I wasn't in particular favor of option A, but I have 2 questions, and then we'll speak to option A. 2 questions through to staff. The first is that there is 5 trees, 5 poplar trees on the east side, currently on the east side of the path. I really don't expect an accurate answer, but and I wasn't able to get to the site today. But there is a longer row of poplar trees on the west side. Does staff happen to know the number of trees along that stretch?
Through to the mayor, I just did a quick count. It looks like maybe over 10.
Yeah.
There are also 3 existing London planes at the northernmost end of the pathway.
Thank you. I thought there was at least 10. My second question through the staff is, with option A, how close will the widened path be to the west side row of poplars. So does the path have to come away from the west side poplars to mitigate future impacts?
Mr. DeMar could probably provide a more accurate answer, but I believe the path will be over the existing alignment, just widening it out. So the poplars on the west side would stay in the location where they are with respect to the path. Mr. DeMar?
Thanks, Ms. Clary. Through the mayor. Yeah, the intent would be to try to maintain the western edge of the path close to where it currently is. We'd like to, as we get into the details, see if we can move it a little bit to try to get a little more clearance off the trees. But we have to keep in mind that the boulder lighting is along the west side of that path, so we don't want to get the path too far away from that. Otherwise, we would be losing the effectiveness of the lighting at that location.
Okay, thank you. Well, you will of course have given consideration to if that is the case, that the west side of the path line stays pretty close to the trees, what the impacts are in the future. But we wouldn't want to see this, happen all over again a number of years. So my thoughts is that there is it's nice to have the canopy on both, or the trees on both sides in the canopy over the path with the 5, but it's at least twice as long on the west side. And that provides great ambience for that park and to that path existing. And my feeling is that the path is unsafe. It's unsafe when it's accessible, and it's not accessible when it's flooding. And I go through that area with some frequency on the path, or that area, and quite frankly, I think staff have found that that's not acceptable, and I don't think it's acceptable to us for active transportation in our community. It's an important stretch of sidewalk through that park, connecting the park end to end, and a parking lot and the playground and other facilities at the other end. So another question through to staff is that has consideration been given to not only replacing the 5 poplars with London plane, but actually continuing that row on the east side so that you would have a longer corridor of trees, a canopy on both sides, and you'd in effect be adding trees to the park?
Through the mayor, sorry, so just to clarify, you're saying increase the frequency of London planes on the east side?
Correct. The report speaks to replacing 5 with 5, but again, it looks like there might be room for another 4 or 5, given that there's already going to be a row there that would only add to our canopy and add to the ambience of that pathway in the park.
We could consider that. The London planes do have a much wider canopy when mature, so we'd want to space them a little bit, but we could bring that back to our park staff and see if we could add more trees in that area.
Okay. So while I appreciate the community will certainly have concerns with the removal of 5 trees, it's not just the removal of 5 trees, as I think Councillor Wainwright brought attention to, is there will be replacement. The replacements won't be as large immediately, but in the longer term it will be better for our urban canopy, forest canopy, and I think better for the park to deal with the safety concerns. I know staff want to commence this work during this summer season, which is the most appropriate time to do that. So if motion option A is put forward, I will be supporting it. Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just one more question for Ms. Clary. In regards to the, so option A, I see that they're going to improve drainage in that area, so that's good. But I'm wondering, most of the poplars are still going to be there. So I guess my concern is if we think they're going to be there for another 10 or 15 years, and we're going to put a new path over the existing one, are we at risk of the same thing happening again with those poplar trees pushing up and damaging our brand new path?
I will have to defer to either Mr. DeMar or Mr. Robinson on this. I do know that keeping the existing poplars will benefit drainage. We don't want to remove all the trees at once. That'll have a negative impact. But I'll let Mr. DeMar fill you in on the techniques to prevent the roots from leaving the path in the future.
Thanks, Ms. Clary. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. Now, there's a few different techniques that we can use when we're building that path to try to mitigate the same things happening with the root heave through root guards and root pruning. And if we're only having to deal with trees on one side of the path and not both, we have a better chance to try to see that path lasts a longer point and has less impact from those adjacent trees. So yeah, we'll certainly be employing those sorts of techniques to help protect that pathway from the roots of the trees in that area.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, my concern is that we go through all this of taking down trees, building a new path, and then in 5 years from now that we're back to square one again. So yeah, hopefully that can be prevented.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Garland, who was the second time speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question and a comment. Question to Mr. Robinson. When you might expect work to commence if option A is passed on today, and when you might expect it would be completed?
Through the chair to council, this is actually going out to tender. It's part of our gas tax funding, so it'll be going out in our tender package. So if we get approval tonight, it'll go in with a series of other concrete projects. We'd expect probably a 3 or 4 week turnaround on the tender, and then look for a build in the summer.
Thank you. Just sort of anecdotally, I know a person who lives across the street from the park, and I gave them all the options on the table, including the one that Councillor O'Keefe had proposed, and they were in favor of option A, just so the rest of council knows. And this is a regular user of the path, and so that sort of gave me some input right away. So thank you.
Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and I appreciate Councillor Gurnett mentioning having had the opportunity to speak to a resident about this, because I can't help but feel, that the public users of the park probably would really appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on this as well. And I can't help but think that if we weren't moving forward with option A, and a third option were at least going to be studied and brought back to council as a potential third option for consideration, with some more detail identified, that it gives the public an opportunity to, at large, to provide some insight to council, which I think would be important. I'm also concerned to echo comments I think that first came from the mayor and then further from Councillor O'Keefe around the prospect of the poplars to the west that would be retained to continue to cause some disturbance to the new pathway. Obviously not immediately, but probably in the nearer term, potentially than we would like to see for an investment of this nature. So I continue to have some concerns with option A. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further questions, we do have a recommendation, and I would ask council to give consideration, if moving option 1, that the second part that says immediate release be issued to inform the public about the impending tree removal, that be amended to removal and replacement, and that we might add a third bullet, if you will, for staff to consider extending the row of trees on the east side.
So I'll move what the mayor just said.
So we have 3 parts to the motion.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any further discussion? I'll call Councillor Duncan, please.
Comment about item 3. I'm just looking at the photographs, and I'm not sure where the trees could go if they're extended on that side. They already go along the entire length of the path from the skate park all the way to the park. I mean, like around to the playground. I'd like to make it dog leg and go past the playground, or further out, like off the photograph, like past the parking lot? Where would they be extending them?
No, just extending from approximately the middle of the park to the playground. And again, just for staff to give consideration to that. It's
So going around I guess, would that be the north side of the playground fence?
yes,
Okay.
to the north side of the playground. I'm sorry, I didn't speak clearly to that. Sorry, Ms. Clary, did you wish to, please?
Sorry, just to clarify, earlier when you asked about that, I thought you were talking about increasing the frequency. So right now there are, in the design, there are 5 London planes spread out along the length of the path. However, we could probably plant more in between there if that was council's desire, as long as our park staff would agree with if that was in a suitable place.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm imagining either. Just if there's more trees, that's better. If that's possible. Councillor Fallot?
I was just going to say, I don't think we need to get too carried away with this because we've got the skate bowl on one end and the playground at the other, at the south end. And then we run out of space as to where trees would be planted. If we are going to ask staff to come back and look at where else they could plant them, you know, there's a limited amount of space. I appreciate the mayor's intent to ensure that we take advantage of an opportunity to plant another tree. But I think at the end of the day, we're probably going to be restricted as to how much space, and we certainly don't want to create. Right now, it's a nice open feel with the trees, and if we do crowd it or get other species that are lower, then we create a wall, and that's not something we would want in a playground either.
No, thank you, Councillor. Just to clarify, I'm not suggesting trees elsewhere in the park other than alongside the path where existing trees are. But thank you for that. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it doesn't necessarily need to be in the motion. I think staff has heard us, and I think if they can find room for an extra tree or two along that path, they would probably, I mean, it's my assertion that they would probably go ahead with that.
Okay, the motion on the floor does have the 3 parts to it. If somebody wants to amend it, it's just it's a recommendation to staff that they consider. It's not stipulating that it carry forward. So if you choose to amend the motion on the floor, I'm acceptable to entertaining that. Okay. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Fallot, Councillor O'Keefe are opposed. The motion does carry. Thank you, Council.
No, Councillor Fallot was in favor.
Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe. My apologies.
And Councillor Rintoul.
Councillor Rintoul and Councillor O'Keefe were opposed.
Thank you.
We'll next move to item 13D, which is the Tulista boat launch float replacement, and request an introduction from staff, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this report is about the floats at Tulista boat launch. These floats are scheduled to be replaced in 2022. There was some recent public discussion about the floats having exposed styrofoam, and they do have exposed styrofoam at this time. They are scheduled to be replaced in 2022. At this point, the fund that is used to replace the infrastructure at the Tulista boat launch does not currently have enough funding in it available to actually do the work. We are working on refreshing quotes with today's prices. We expect the quotes to be between 20 and 30% more than the quote that we received back in 2019, just with the price of materials right now. And we do know it will take some time to actually build the floats. So at this point, the earliest the floats could be replaced would be for the 2022 boating season. And that would be if there was some additional funding brought in to actually do the work, or if the Tulista boat launch just happened to make a lot more money this summer for some reason, which doesn't historically happen. But to follow with the plan would be to replace them after the 2022 season. So that would be ready to be put in the water for 2023. And that is the summary of
Thank
the
you.
report.
We'll turn to staff, we'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I suspect that all of council would prefer to see the replacement done before the 2022 season. And I understand that we could potentially do that by borrowing from surplus and then paying it back. I'd like to move that we do that.
Second.
Okay, we have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder first, and then go to Councillor O'Keefe.
I don't think there's really any need to
sorry, it's
discuss
received
it.
for information. Sorry. Yep. Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, I was just going to, when I discussed that option with staff earlier, we had talked about whether they needed in the motion something about how, about moving the budget item from the 2022 budget into the 2021 budget. So I'm wondering if any shortfall to be covered by the by surplus. So I'm wondering if staff still require that additional bit in the motion.
I'll turn to Mr. Hisik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Because it is an amendment to the established budget, it should be done by resolution,
Okay,
outlining.
so I would propose
Okay,
if
we have a motion on the floor, Council.
Can I clarify my motion? It's that the 2021 budget be amended so that the replacement of the Tulista boat launch floats occur prior to the 2022 season, and that we borrow from surplus to provide the necessary funding for that.
Perfect.
Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Wainwright. So we have that moved and seconded. We've had some discussion. Any further discussion? All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And last on the staff reports, we have 13E, the agreement extension for banking services. I'll turn to staff if they wish to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is essentially what staff consider an administrative item to simply renew our existing banking services agreement. It's just currently under our policies, it does require that it go to council, and that's something I would very much like to change. So we're satisfied with our long-term provider, and it's very disruptive to our operations as well as to many of our customers to change it. So we're just looking to extend it as far as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Hisik. We have a staff recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that council approves the proposed 3-year banking services agreement with Toronto Dominion with the option to renew for an additional 2 years ending on May 31st, 2026.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll next turn to items of correspondence, and we do have 3. Item 14A is interest in the Vancouver Island Integrated Major Crime Unit, and we have an email from Staff Sergeant Conley of our RCMP detachment.
I'll move that council provide a letter to Mr. Ward Limburner, Executive Director of Police Services Branch, expressing interest in joining VAA MCU and requesting update on VAA MCU expansion process as they become available.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I would have liked some more info on this. I have a vague understanding of what this organization is, but in terms of the need for it in our community, and more importantly, whether there would be any additional costs. So I'll support the motion, but it would be nice to have that additional information at some point.
Okay, I'll turn to Mr. Humble, who wishes to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I have some limited knowledge about VIMQ. So basically, it's an integrated police unit. It's made up of contributions from some RCMP detachments that are involved, as well as Central Saanich Police is a member. Currently Oak Bay, Saanich, as well as Victoria Police Departments. VIMQ was created in 2007 with the intention of gaining the benefits of integrated police opportunities. It does have a focus on major crime, in particular homicides. So at the end of the day, it's really about having an insurance policy for the municipality. Homicides have the potential, if it occurs within the boundary of the municipality, of being quite expensive for that jurisdiction. So being a member is an opportunity for much of the policing costs that are involved in homicide investigation to be covered through this integrated police unit. In terms of actual costs to the municipality, I did ask the question in terms of what we'd be looking at. I wasn't able to receive an exact amount. However, I am aware that Oak Bay Police in 2020 paid approximately $90,000 as a member of VIMQ. So I fully anticipate it's in that ballpark range. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. And just to add a little bit to that, this arose through our annual discussion, Mr. Humble and I, our annual discussions with the detachment commander at the beginning of the term, and I raised it with colleague mayors in Souk who have the Souk RCMP detachment, and it's since arisen with the North Cowichan Duncan detachment as well. So interestingly, the West Shore detachment, RCMP detachment, is a part of VIMQ along with municipalities, but we, in understanding what the significant costs could be if a major crime was to occur, that we would seek to find out the opportunity to participate with neighboring municipalities. And so we do have a recommendation. Oh, sorry, the motion is on the floor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you. And we'll turn to item 14B, which is proclaiming the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration.
I move that Council issue a statement in support of ecological restoration and the UN's Decade on Ecosystem Restoration.
Second.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Good idea. The only reason I'll vote against it is unless we're going to pass this and actually do something about it immediately and have a strategy, that's good. You know, in the letter from Saanich, they outlined about their ecosystem restoration program, getting their residents involved, a number of activities that they're taking. So it makes sense for them to endorse this and at the same time advise their community and others about what they are actually doing for ecological restoration. So if we're going to do this, it should come along with something so that we're sort of putting our money where our mouth is, that we're walking the talk. But just to make a declaration to say we support this without doing anything, to me sort of rings hollow. So unless we're going to do anything more than just make a statement, I'll vote against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Further comment? Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I think what we can do when we issue that statement, and I feel that the mayor would probably have done this anyway, but is note that we've already put an awful lot of money where our mouth is. We've already done it. We just did a really huge remediation project that's going to lead into more replanting and parks improvements. So, I mean, ecosystem restoration starts with doing those huge remediation projects we just did and highlighting that work. We also have peninsula streams being active and working towards even greater Roberts Bay restoration and research. And I have no concern whatsoever that Sidney is not actively engaged in ecological restoration already, and that we cannot do what Saanich did and simply speak about what we've already got going on, how we're already providing money towards these things. These projects are already in play with our ecological partners, or with our environmental partners and First Nations partners as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Turn back to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. And I'm fine with that. So all I'm saying is that I don't want us to just make a statement. So if the statement involves covering off those things that Councillor Duncan talks about, I think we should use that opportunity to highlight those things that we are doing. Thank you.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And 14C is dedicated bench program. We have a letter from the Morrisons dated April 9th. Councillor Fallot.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I asked that this come forward at a future council meeting, and this letter came to us a couple of weeks ago. This was a family who came forward to the previous council. There was two families actually that came forward when we brought in a memorial bench, dedicated bench program. And staff had sent out letters informing all of those people who were registered in the bench program that there were some changes coming, and there was a cost and a time limit to the length of their dedicated bench. And I believe some people opted to make the purchase and extend their program, how long they had the memorial bench. Others weren't able to be contacted. Their contact information was out of date. And two families came forward and said they had a verbal agreement with staff to, and there was never any mention that there was a time limit to the memorial benches. And one of the arguments that staff came up with, that staff responded to, was that there is a maintenance attached to the benches, and all of that has to be somehow supported, and I understand that. What I disagreed with at the time, and still to this day disagree with, is there was a verbal agreement made with the families, and I certainly remember what those verbal agreements were like at the time. People said, we'd like to buy a memorial bench, and the town said, that's great. We'd like to increase our benches around the town. This is a win-win. The town gets a piece of infrastructure that they don't have to pay for. It's paid for by a family. Family gets a plaque on it. And it was taken for granted that the town would pay for the maintenance of the bench. And to change that arrangement and formalize it, and given that there was two families that spoke up and said, please respect our verbal agreement and extend the courtesy, I argued at the time, at the previous, I think it was in 2017, that we should grandfather those two people. And today, I again will ask staff that we relook at this policy for the two people, the Morrisons who wrote the letter, and I think the records will reflect who the other one is, the other family, and indicate that we will grandfather and the bench will last as long as it lasts until it doesn't last again. So I would like to make a motion that we grandfather the Morrisons bench as well as the other family who petitioned the town in 2017.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Okay, you've motivated before, Councillor Fallot, and I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I agree with the principles that Councillor Fallot has just stated. The memorial benches are only put in places where the town actually wants benches. And in fact, if nobody had come forward with a memorial bench, we would have put a bench in there anyway, eventually. as part of our capital plans. And if we'd done that, we'd be maintaining those benches ourselves. So the difference really is there's a little plaque on the bench, a little extra bit that we have to maintain that we wouldn't have been maintaining if it wasn't a memorial bench. And yeah, you know, we could reasonably say, if there's some maintenance of the plaque, you'll have to pay for it if you want to keep this as a memorial bench, right? But even in terms of the concrete bench eventually turning to rubble and needing to be replaced, it's a town bench. We would have replaced it anyway. Given that there are only 2 exceptions, I think it's quite reasonable to grandfather it. It's a circumstance that, you know, we did not have a formal contract. There was a verbal understanding. The verbal understanding that you pay your money and you've got your bench. That's my understanding of how it worked too. So I have no reason to doubt them that they were told that, you know, for a certain amount of money, they'd have a memorial bench in perpetuity. I do certainly support us tightening up our policies, moving forward and all that. But I don't see it as a difficult thing grandfathering these 2. And I think that is a reasonable thing for us to do. So I'll support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? Okay, my only comment is, and I'm understanding of the reasons put forward by my 2 colleagues, but the recommendation from staff was report, and I don't know if there are things that staff want to report out on. This would be coming back to council, which isn't to say we couldn't do what we're doing with the motion on the floor, but it doesn't. I wouldn't expect staff to respond with additional information given the motion that's been put on the floor, given the recommendation to go to staff. So that's my comment. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm in favor of what Councillor Fallett and Councillor Wainwright are suggesting. I was thinking of a report though, because I'm curious about our current policy, and even Councillor Wainwright's comments about we only put benches in places where we need them anyways. And if somebody is going to come and pay $3,000 to put in a bench, okay, that's great. They covered that cost. Are we going to ask them to pay another $10,000, $3,000 10 years down the road in order to renew their bench? So I'm not. I'd be interested in getting a bit more information and a report from staff. So, for example, I have no idea of, you know, how are we getting more and more of these requests? What is the actual cost of the benches? How often would they be replaced? So I'm fine with the motion, but I would be interested in getting a little bit more information on the policy. Thank you.
So, Councillor O'Keefe, I just have to understand, you're supportive of the motion, but you would request, or perhaps you're going to make an amendment or an amendment to the motion, or a motion arising, requesting more information. And what would council do with that information if we're taking a decision?
To review to review the existing policy.
I'll turn to Mr. Humble and Ms. Clary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on the actual motion, staff have no concerns, you know, in terms of the motion, certainly from a staff perspective at least, and we also think it's important actually to subsequently at the appropriate time when staff has the capacity to bring a report forward with some additional detail, and there's a lot of complexity associated with this program, and it's important that we bring this forward for council's attention anyways. So that would be our intent.
Thanks, Mr. Humble. Did Ms. Clary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also wanted to clarify that the report that went to council in 2016 actually identified 72 benches that were pre-agreement. So that's 72 people who may be coming forward asking to be grandfathered in. So although you're just talking about 2 specific situations of people who have come forward at this time, there are, several other benches that need to be addressed as well if this is moved past tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you very much. So just back to Councillor O'Keefe's comments about reviewing the policy. I'm not interested in reviewing the policy. I'm good with the policy. What I took exception to and still do is that at the time when the policy was changed and the letters went out to anybody, to everybody who was registered, who had benches and information. Some of the information may have been out of date, but I'm assuming that everybody was contacted. These 2 people certainly were contacted. There was Morrison, and I forget the name of the other family. They were the only 2 that stepped forward. Others had agreed to pay for it or said, no, once the life of our bench, according to your new policy, expires, we're not going to renew it. That the opportunity to speak up and ask to be grandfathered happened. That was already, this person, the Morrison, was someone who spoke in 2017 and just spoke up again this time because they got the letter saying that unless they pay for an extension, their bench will be removed at the end of the year. So they reached out and said, it wasn't right, and we still agree that it isn't right. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this again and ask that we grandfather them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Further discussion? We have the motion on the floor. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify with staff. So Mr. Humble mentioned that staff would like to come back with a report. Is that something that they're going to do anyways, or do they require a motion for us to request that?
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. I think just for the record, and so that we have it as part of our council action items, I think just a resolution would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Humble.
I'll move then that staff come back to council with a report regarding the dedicated memorial bench program.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Or any discussion, sorry, on this motion? Seeing none, those in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to our correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
Those in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. And we do have a motion to go on camera.
I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters respecting personal information pursuant to section 90.1J of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you, council. We'll reconvene. I have 9:19 here. We'll reconvene at 9:25 for the in-camera on this same Zoom link. Thank you.